Hey, John Gilroy here. Today, we're going to dive into the world of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity for the federal government. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. In the virtual studio today is Snehal Attani, CEO of Horizon3.ai. Snehal, you're going to jump into the game here, aren't you? Right into the deep end, huh?
It'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, you pick up your phone, you Mythos this, Mythos that. Oh, it's too good. We can't release it. Is that a publicity scam? Is that real? Here, people in the federal government, they're all confused. They don't know what to do. So we got a lifeline coming in from California. So give us some insight on some of this craziness that's taken place in the last couple months.
Yeah, I think that it's really important now to really cut through the hype and figure out what's the actual threat we've got to worry about, and how has the future operating environment or the operating environment changed for us to take action around. Because fear mongering is one thing, but actually getting that into what to go do is what's important. So when you think about Mythos and any of these LLMs, there's been this trend over the last few years that the effort to find a bug in software is going to zero, meaning LLMs are really good at analyzing source code. That's their superpower. Claude Code, OpenAI, and so on. They're really good at taking source code and finding flaws in it. And it's something that's been around for a long time. They're just much better and faster at it, especially doing it in really large code bases. And so the effort to find a bug in your code goes to zero. But the effort to actually exploit that bug is still high. And that still takes quite a bit of effort. And so, what we have to understand is the difference between being vulnerable to a bug and being actually exploitable to that problem, number one. Number two is it's never been harder to decide what not to do. The Mythos moment in many ways, it was great in that it raised awareness at the leadership level that AI and cyber warfare was coming, but it was also frustrating for practitioners that have been clamoring and shouting from the rooftops that we've got to invest more in cyber to begin with. So when I think about the Mythos moment here, deciding what not to fix has never been more important. If I had 100,000 vulnerabilities today all ready to go sort through, and then with Mythos or LLMs, there's going to be another 100, 200, 300,000 coming out, well, that doesn't help me any. I already had 100,000 to go fix. What do I go do next? So vulnerable versus exploitable and deciding what not to fix are two of the most pressing problems to go figure out over the next few months as this, what I called Vulnpocalypse or surge of vulnerabilities starts to hit all of the federal government. And honestly, several of those will become CISA KEVs. And that's actually where things get really dicey for the government, because they are mandated by CISA and statutorily to quickly address these CISA known exploitable vulnerabilities very quickly. And if you couldn't handle one a month, how are you going to handle one a day, one an hour? So you have this tidal wave heading towards us of just straight up vulnerability management that we need to get ahead of.
I just learned the phrase SaaSpocalypse. Now I got to put another in my vocabulary notebook, Vulnpocalypse, all kinds of apocalypse. So what's the future of bug bounties? That's gone by the wayside, huh?
I think that bug bounties are going to get really split into two groups. You've got a lot of bug bounty that was pretty straightforward and kind of low skill, low effort, low value. And I think a lot of that goes away. I do think that exquisite, bespoke bug bounties that require real human ingenuity is still going to be there. But the expertise required to do that is also very niche and very specialized. So said another way, there is going to be a small group of people that continue to do amazing things and find themselves on stage at DEF CON. There's a whole group of people that were making a living off of low value vulnerabilities that all kind of go away. And I do think that the world of experts will continue to get paid a premium, but the low hanging fruit stuff is just better and cheaper found by LLMs.
Magicians are famous for misdirecting. And so it seems like what you're saying is Mythos is fine. However, it's misdirecting. The real topic we should do is try to prioritize these vulnerabilities. It's not they're all one value. They're different values, and maybe from agency to agency might have different importances. So is that where the rubber should meet the road in prioritization?
Yeah, so like a technical example of this is a couple of years ago, there was a vulnerability called Log4Shell that hit the
Hmm.
news. And Log4Shell was devastating because the Log4j jar file, which is used for application logging, was deeply embedded everywhere. Vendor package software, deeply embedded in open source components. You didn't really know where they were. And so you had this massive footprint to go figure out. And people burned a lot of their Christmas vacation that year. I think it was 2023, maybe something like that, of trying to go patch all these log4j jar files that were vulnerable, quote unquote. But just because I was vulnerable didn't mean I was exploitable. I could have put compensating or mitigating controls in place. For example, modifying the firewall rules to prevent a specific type of outbound connection that was crucial for the attacker to actually exploit you. So just because you've got the jar file that's vulnerable doesn't mean it's a threat anymore. You've neutralized that threat through compensating or mitigating controls. So I think deciding what not to fix and clearly understanding the difference between an issue that's just a vulnerability versus an issue that's actually exploitable in your network becomes key criteria for what problems you've got to skip your kid's basketball game to stay behind and fix, and which ones can wait till tomorrow to fix.
Speaking of vocabulary, there's a new term floating around called Project Glasswing. And from what I've gleaned is that Mythos is available to a certain limited number of large companies, and everyone else, too bad. It just doesn't. I mean, so does that mean there's no concern or something? And where do they draw the line between this company's too big, this company's not big enough? I mean, it seems like there's something wrong in the whole logic there.
Yeah, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about Glasswing and how that's come together. One conspiracy theory is several public company CEOs were sick of Anthropic torpedoing their stock price every few months, and they all just agreed to like be part of this consortium and get Wall Street to not overreact on every Anthropic announcement. There's others where they're creating a walled garden of the haves and the have-nots. And then the third conspiracy theory is that Anthropic didn't have enough compute to service Mythos, and
Ah,
so
yeah.
this was just a way to kind of allay concern for compute. The answer is let's just take the positive side. Cybersecurity is a team sport at the end of the day. It requires an ecosystem of partners to work together in order to actually defend against the adversary. And let's optimistically hope that Glasswing is the start of that, and that the various conspiracy theory, Twitter, rumor mill things that have been going around are just that, just noise. But I do think that the spirit of building an ecosystem of people that are working together is super important for all of us to be successful in cyber.
I've been in the Pentagon many times, and a phrase that's popular in there is force multiplier. And so when I take a look at different vulnerabilities, but putting them together in a chain, some people call that, a attack chain. And so 1 and 1 is suddenly 5 in an attack chain. It's a false multiplier, isn't it? So this might be a concern to think about too. Hmm?
Yeah, so this goes back to there's an interesting set of research papers that said Mythos continues to be really good, although it wasn't exponentially better, it was incrementally better in vulnerability research and finding flaws in source code. But it was actually worse at runtime exploitation compared to previous models. And this goes back to the importance of how difficult it is to actually execute an attack in a real production system. So there's a fundamental problem with a lot of the LLM offensive research that's happening right now. So you'll see these benchmarks. There was one benchmark from the NCSC out of the UK that talked about Mythos successfully compromising one of their ranges 3 out of 10 times. And there was a lot of hoopla and celebration about that. But I actually read that in the negative way, which is that range didn't change. Nothing about the environment changed in all 10 runs. Yet Mythos got it wrong 7 times. If the environment hasn't changed, it better get the same answer each and every time. What that leaves me, what makes clear is that LLMs are still inherently non-deterministic and they are unreliable in repeated runs. And that might be acceptable in, say, research or in a lab environment, but in a real production environment, if you're hacking yourself, you better get the same answer 5 out of 5 times against a target that hasn't changed. And that's a pretty big engineering leap. And what we've also seen now is the models themselves don't matter. It's actually the harness or the scaffolding where the value for offensive cyber exists. And so, I think we're going to keep seeing new models hit the newswire every 3, 4, 5 months, and they're going to get slightly better. But the real interesting innovation now is the realization across the market that the harness, the orchestration framework for using those models, is actually where the value is in offensive cyber, not the models themselves. And I'll pause there and share a story from Project Maven of where we actually saw this in a past life. But does that make sense?
Yeah. I want to say wrapper, but it's different from a wrapper, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the orchestration layer. It's the engine.
Yeah.
It's the long-term memory. So in Project Maven, Drew Kukor, who was leading it at the time, and I was at JSOC. So I joined JSOC in 2018. Maven spun up in 17, and we had the privilege of working closely with Drew and the Maven team. And Drew said something really insightful back in 18. He said, "What's obvious to all of us now is the models and weights don't matter. These models are going to be disposable. They're going to get aged out. And you're going to throw them away all the time. The two things that are durable in AI are the harness and the training data. And if you can master both of those, that's where the enduring value is. And then you design a system whose architecture treats the models as disposable." Now, that actually underpinned the way we architected Horizon 3 and Node 0. We focused on the harness and we focused on the training data, and that the underlying models were just, we'd replace them or throw them away or use the right model for the task over time. And that's actually worked really well for us. And I think the rest of the industry is starting to realize that the models are disposable and the real engineering investment needs to be in the other two layers.
I'm sure you go to Substack and you'll get people having fierce debates over different levels of Claude. And well, for this is, but I use the early one for that. When you said the word disposable, it just, well, yeah, well, just wait till the next bus comes by, huh?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, we actually just published a research paper that proved we could be as effective using Haiku, which is an older, crappier, cheaper model. But with a really strong harness, you can actually get these lower capable models to be really effective. And the reason why that's important is older, lower, less capable models are cheaper to run. So suddenly you can have a really good harness and really cheap models be extremely effective and consistent and reliable in real production environments. Now you're not waiting on the latest and greatest models. What that also means, though, is the adversary who is actively using distillation attacks to pull out as much data from the latest models from the American Frontier Labs as possible, are able to get to good enough if they build the right harness around it. So suddenly, what we think is the latest model being far superior, that advantage doesn't really hold up in the real world because a strong harness in a cheaper model is going to be comparable in effectiveness and results.
This sounds like operations to me, doesn't it? I mean, more than anything,
Yeah, it
maybe
does.
enterprise architecture. Is it enterprise architecture? I don't know. I think it is.
Yeah, so there's an enterprise architecture component to this, and it's just good design, to be honest with you. What are the durable parts of the stack, and what are the ephemeral parts of the stack that are always going to change, and how do you design around it? There's another interesting problem, though. So there are certain use cases, offensive cyber being one, financial fraud being another example, and so on, where there's extremely limited training data. So remember, how did OpenAI and Anthropic and all these companies, how did they get the training data to build out these models? They basically scraped the web, right? There is not a lot of offensive real production systems data on the web. Last I checked, JP Morgan didn't publish their production network configurations anywhere, right? That's all buried.
That's next week.
That's next week. Like, that's buried deeply behind JP Morgan's firewalls. Check fraud. You don't see a lot of training data for check fraud available on the web. That's deeply, buried behind the firewalls. Even full self-driving, there was no corpus of training data for full self-driving when Tesla started to pursue FSD. What did they have to do? They had to accrue their own training data. What they tried, though, was they tried using synthetics. They tried using Microsoft Gaming Studios to simulate real-world environments. But that type of data didn't have the resolution needed to actually train these models to make effective decisions. So in offensive cyber, you have this really fundamental flaw in every AI agent for cyber that is inherently poisoned. So before I talk about that, does that make sense when I talk about real world high resolution training data versus scraped off the web, thin, shallow
Yeah,
data instead?
it's shiny object versus real world, you know?
Or, the analogy I use is a picture of Pluto from the 70s had like
Yeah,
4 or 5 white pixels, if you remember.
I
And then a
remember.
picture of Pluto in 2018 or whatever was extremely high resolution. You can't train off of a few white pixel dots of Pluto. You need extremely high resolution. So as a result, we're actually going to publish a research paper soon that proves this out. All these LLM wrappers for cyber are inherently poisoned. And they're inherently poisoned because they have a bias for looking for things they've seen before. So if you are trained on open vulnerability data sets, capture the flag competition or educational ranges, and small labs and things like that, you don't have the data depth or data diversity to have that high resolution. So we've actually proven you can show a basic hack the box range or what's called juice shop signatures and so on in a real network. And the LLM is going to see that, remember it from its training data, and pursue that route. So suddenly, in the world of AI and cyber warfare, deception is super important. You can use deception to get these LLMs to burn tokens. You can use deception to get them to blow out their context windows. And you can use deception to get them to chase dead ends. So I actually think that these LLMs are going to perform really well in labs, but when they're in contact with the adversary, if they're run against a network that's actively trying to fight back, I actually don't think they're going to be very effective because of this fundamental training data flaw that they're all suffering with.
I think of a walled garden, and if you only fight fifth grade boys in a walled garden, you're going to win. And it reminds me of Kramer and Seinfeld. He was a champion in that karate school. Then he got out in the real world. It was bad.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. So I do think we're going to see that. Now, the parallel of this we've actually seen already previously. So back to Maven, one of the things that the Maven team openly talked about was the concern that the adversary would somehow poison the training data so that an aircraft carrier group looked like a flock of birds, right? And
Yeah.
there's really straightforward ways to go off and do that. If the adversary gains access to the training data pipeline, they can infect it, if you will. But the same effect happens if you don't have diverse training data. If you're shallow, you can induce it to do different things. Two examples of that. One story I read was in Ukraine, the Ukrainians found that if they put a QR code from Baidu.com on their vehicles, then the Russian drones would do image recognition. It would trigger, because they were Chinese models, it would actually trigger the purchase and completely confuse the drone. Right? So that's an example of adversarial AI and model poisoning. Another example was during the riots and protests where facial recognition was being used. Protesters realized certain face tattoos or face patterns tricked the facial recognition into not being able to recognize who they were.
Yeah.
And so those are examples of inducing bad behavior or wrong behavior in a model by knowing how to abuse its training data. And I do think that in cyber and AI, every single defensive agent and the offensive agents that are dependent on these LLMs are inherently susceptible to model poisoning.
Well, this is the Federal Tech Podcast after all, so we got to talk about our federal listeners here. And so we talked about Maven, we talked about harnesses. So what does this mean for federal agencies and critical infrastructure providers?
Let's split this up, I think, into three areas. First and foremost, the hardest part of the job is deciding what not to fix. The number one priority, I think, for every federal CISO, state CISO, critical infrastructure CISO is mastering the art of prioritizing where to surge their resources. That prioritization needs to take into account, am I actually exploitable? Are threat actors known to use this tactic? That's where sysadmins come into play. And what is the consequence? If this is exploited, what is the consequence? What's the risk to mission? What's the risk to infrastructure? What's the risk to business? And you need to prioritize your limited resources based on those three criteria. And you've got to build that muscle memory yesterday. And number one. Number two is The biggest bottleneck for every organization is remediation. It's actually fixing the stuff. It's not finding it. And remediation is often bottlenecked on those few engineers or senior leaders or admins that actually have the tribal knowledge for how to fix stuff in the organization. So investing and surging to increase remediation capacity is probably the second most important thing to get after. And then the third is building muscle memory, training like you fight. When I first joined JSOC, remember my military experience was watching Jack Ryan and Tropic Thunder. Like I wasn't a shooter, I didn't come from that world. I was a tourist at Fort Bragg, but I had the privilege to learn from the greatest leaders the world will never know about. And what made the organization and those units so incredibly capable was they mastered the fundamentals. They were absolute experts in shoot, move, and communicate. And they trained like they fought. They built the muscle memory so that when they were actually in bad situations, they had already built the muscle memory to know how to react. And so the third part to this, prioritization number one, remediation capacity number two, the third is build the muscle memory for how to respond to incidents because you're going to have way more incidents that you've ever dealt with before. And you don't want to learn how to deal with those incidents in the middle of the crisis. You want to build that memory, muscle memory ahead of time.
I started off with talking about Mythos. I have a quote here that I want to slip in here before we continue the conversation. Rob Joyce, he's the former director of the NSA. He said that even before Mythos, the risk environment changed dramatically due to large language models. And so, end of the world Mythos, another bump in the road. I mean, we have to put these in perspective. I mean, the LLMs themselves were changing the game, and we're just in the middle of the game, and maybe the proper response is with properly assigned harnesses, huh?
Yeah, so it goes back to the fundamentals in cyber. Prioritization, remediation, train like you fight. Those are the equivalent of shoot, move, and communicate. And if you can master those three, you're going to set yourselves up to have a chance at reducing the blast radius of an attack. The attacker is going to get in. We are all in cyber. We are in the blast radius management business. It's our job to do what we can to contain the attack and minimize the damage from that attack because it's impossible to keep them out. And this goes back to training like you fight. If you get an alert, how do you know that that's an alert that's important? How do you prioritize it? How do you execute the IR workflows from there? So on and so forth. So training like you fight is probably the most important part of what's going on. Rob Joyce, so he led TAO at NSA, and he gave this talk at the Enigma conference back in, I think, 16 or 17 or something. And he said, when he was at TAO, we knew more about your network than you do. Like
Oh.
that's the superpower of an offensive operation. They're not developing 0 days on the fly. They've already done the research. They've done the recon. They've built the exploit kits. There's very little creativity in the actual execution of a cyber op. It's persistence, it's thoroughness, it's inventorying, it's landmarking. There's all the it's well-defined maneuvering. That part of the attack isn't creative. It's just methodical. And if you can find this Rob Joyce talk from the Enigma conference, it's just an amazing and insightful way to understand how TAO operated, which is how all cyber operators execute around the world.
Well, here's a nightmare for you to consider. Is it possible that maybe we are entering a world where AI-generated exploits are more dangerous than the vulnerabilities they distract people from keeping their eye on the ball? It's not what you expect, is it? It's a curveball here.
Yeah, so I do think that there is back to a SOC. So let's look at it this way. When I was a CTO at Splunk, a security operations center analyst, an average one could do 20 investigations a day. A really good one could do 30 investigations a day. And a junior could do maybe 10, right? So that's the range of human capacity between 10 and 30 alert investigations a day. If they used agents to help augment them, maybe they triple up. Maybe they get to like 100 investigations a day, 150 investigations a day. That's still pretty low because an AI hacker could generate 1,000 alerts a minute, 100,000 alerts a minute, and so on. So I do think that these blitzkrieg style attacks where the AI hacker is going to generate a tremendous amount of noise, overwhelm the SOC analysts because they can't keep up, and then using that as cover for the actual more covert attack. So it's sleight of hand. I'm distracting you with one hand while I pick your pocket with the other. I
Yeah.
do think that's a problem. And this goes back to the muscle memory for incident response. And how do you deal with that? You got to train for that. What happens if you've got way too many alerts? Do you know where your crown jewels are? Do you know what terrain you need to focus on defending when all of your terrain is on fire? You don't want to learn how to do that in the middle of a real attack. You want to learn how to do that up front.
I talk to zero trust people and they say it's not technology, it's a mindset and it's an approach, a philosophy. Okay, I get that. I would imagine that understanding the threats provided by artificial intelligence is also a mind shift as well. So if I could get you in front of 52 leaders in the government, what would you recommend the mind shift for just understanding this whole new attack vector?
I think that one of the problems we have today, especially at the executive level, is chasing shiny objects and chasing headlines. And the reason why that's dangerous as a leader is when the leader chases a shiny object, the next hype in the news, the entire organization gets distracted because they now feel pressure to chase that same shiny object. So as leaders, it's really important to take the next headline. There's going to be another Mythos model that comes out in a couple months. Your organization has limited capacity to chase the next trend. So as a leader, you've got to be very careful of what does this really mean? Like, let's cut through the hype. What does this really mean for us? How does this actually change the fundamentals? And if it doesn't change the fundamentals, maybe it changes urgency. But I don't think anything's going to change the fundamentals that I talked about. How to prioritize, how to quickly fix, how to train like you fight. Like those to me as the fundamentals and the basics. I don't think there's going to be anything that changes the requirement to master those fundamentals. So as a leader, be very careful not to distract your team, because the more your team is distracted, the more implicit risk you're creating for the organization.
No, no. I'll put a link in the show notes. I think you referenced a white paper earlier in the show. I'll put a link to that so people can do more. And if you want to get more information, of course, we can go to the website at horizon3.ai. So we have to do this again and see how well your predictions are. And Mythos 2, what's coming around the horizon? I don't know. It's awful hard to predict, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly right. Let's see what happens. But the certainty is that in the next 4 months, another crazy model is going to come out, and the whole market's going to overreact, and then we'll all recover, and that's just going to be the new cycle that we're in.
Wow. Kind of difficult for heart attack patients here. Great. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Snehal Attani, CEO of Horizon3.ai.